All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about a deal in the AI world that is so massive, it kind of forces you to ask a much bigger question. What is really driving the tech industry right now? And this explainer is all about breaking down one source that has a pretty wild answer. I mean, just look at that number, $300 billion. That is the absolutely jaw-dropping price tag of a single cloud computing deal between OpenAI and Oracle. It's a number that's almost hard to wrap your head around, and it is right at the center of this whole story. And yeah, a number that big is exactly why the source material we're looking at frames the situation so bluntly. From their perspective, a deal of this size isn't just business as usual. Nope, it's a huge, flashing red sign of a massive bubble. So what are the nuts and bolts here? Well, in short, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, has basically promised to pay Oracle $300 billion for raw computing power. We're talking about the massive server horsepower they need to run and train their AI models. It is one of the biggest cloud contracts ever. But to really get why a deal like this is even happening, we've got to step back and look at a concept the source calls the innovation plateau. This is the key, the why behind all that big money flying around. So this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $300 billion question. How do we get to a place where a company would commit to spending $60 billion a year, starting in just a few years, on compute from just one provider? Let's unpack the theory. Okay, so the argument goes something like this. The tech world runs on one simple, brutal rule: grow or die. Investors demand that constant, explosive growth. The problem, though, since about 2015, according to this view, truly revolutionary, game-changing innovation has, well, it's kind of stalled out. We've hit a plateau where all we're getting are small, incremental improvements. Think about it this way. A laptop from over a decade ago is still perfectly fine for what most people do today. Sure, the processor's faster now, the Wi-Fi's better, you've got more storage, but for the average person, the fundamental experience, a screen, a keyboard, a trackpad, it's functionally identical. Those giant leaps have slowed way down. This whole idea of tiny improvements being marketed as a revolution is perfectly captured in this quote from the source about a new, slightly lighter iPhone. I mean, were people really desperate for that? Or is it just what a company stuck on an innovation plateau needs to invent so they have a new product to sell every year? So, if real innovation has slowed to a crawl, how does the tech industry keep that growth engine humming? Well, the answer, according to our source, is by creating and selling a multi-trillion-dollar story. And that story is AI. According to this viewpoint, AI became the perfect narrative. It's the new, sexy, world-changing story that promises the exact kind of explosive growth investors are always hungry for. It's not just a technology, it's a financial story designed to send stock prices to the moon. And the hype has just been turned up to 11, hasn't it? We hear these crazy comparisons like AI is the next internet or even the next electricity. The source pushes back on this hard, calling these comparisons absurd and arguing they're designed to sell a story, not to reflect reality. To kind of ground all of that hype, the source gives this personal and honestly pretty funny example of what AI's actual day-to-day use looks like for them. Yeah, it has value, it can whip up some images for YouTube thumbnails, but is that a function that justifies a multi-trillion-dollar valuation for an entire industry? That's the huge disconnect they're pointing out here. And this brings us to this great analogy they use. The million-dollar water bottle. Think about it. Water is essential, right? It has obvious critical value. But nobody would ever argue it's worth $1 million a bottle. The argument here is that AI is kind of the same. It's useful, for sure, but its current market price is just wildly disconnected from its actual real-world value. Okay, so if there's such a huge gap between the real value and the price tag, how is the story kept alive? Well, this leads us to the next really important idea: the big tech canopy. So here's the metaphor. Imagine the biggest tech companies are like these giant old-growth trees in a forest. Their massive canopy of leaves blocks out all the sunlight, making it almost impossible for new little startups on the forest floor to get the resources, the sunlight, they need to grow and actually compete. And who are the giant trees making up this canopy? Well, it's the usual suspects, the major players tangled up in these massive AI deals. You've got OpenAI working with Microsoft, and with Google, and now with Oracle. They're not just competing anymore. They're building this web where everyone's interests are tied together. Now, the source makes a very strong and definitely politically charged point here to show just how powerful these financial incentives are. The argument being made is that if a company is willing to look past incredibly controversial actions by a client because it's profitable, then there's no way they're going to risk billions by publicly admitting that this whole AI thing, which is paying everybody's bills, might be overhyped. And that's the real kicker, isn't it? The canopy creates this system where everybody at the top benefits from keeping the AI story going. Microsoft, Google, Oracle, they're all getting a huge piece of this pie. And when the money is this big, there's a powerful shared incentive to protect that story from any real criticism.
Okay, so let's bring this all back to where we started, that $300 billion price tag. Now we can see it as not just a contract, but as a really important piece in this much bigger puzzle.
This whole thing reveals what the source calls the AI hype cycle. It all starts when real innovation slows down. Then, to keep investors happy, AI gets sold as the next huge revolution. Then you see these massive interlocking deals, like the one we're talking about, that lock in the big companies. And the end result? The story's protected, and real competition gets squeezed out. So let's look at this deal one more time, but with this new perspective. $300 billion over 5 years for cloud compute. But the really critical thing to remember, and what that note at the bottom points to, is that this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's on top of OpenAI's already huge partnerships with Microsoft and Google. This isn't just a simple transaction. It's like another thick branch being added to that tech canopy, tying the fates of these giants even closer together. And that really leads us to the final conclusion from this viewpoint. The $300 billion deal isn't just a payment for a service. It's a massive, capital-fueled machine designed to keep the hype cycle spinning, to lock in the dominance of the companies already at the top, and to make sure no one dares to point out that the emperor might not be wearing any clothes. Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. When you see a price tag this enormous, is it proof that we're on the verge of a genuine technological revolution? Or is it just the cost of writing, producing, and starring in the most expensive story the tech industry has ever told?